So in this year's budget, we tried to address some of the identified constraints to economic growth in Sri Lanka. These constraints included shortage in access to skills and education, in terms of agricultural productivity, in terms of women's participation in the labor force, in terms of access to affordable finance. So these are some of the major areas that we identified as growth constraints, and we identified interventions in all of these. So for example, with regard to skills and productivity, what we did was we looked at working with the private sector in terms of implementation so that the exact skills that the private sector needs will be supported. So for instance, in areas like IT and the healthcare sector, the private sector would initiate the training programs for the skills that they require, and the government would provide stipends to support and to reduce the cost of that training for those sectors. With regard to agricultural productivity, the traditional practice has been for the government to supply farmers with tools, inputs, investment, infrastructure, and so on. But in this budget, what we want to do is to try to link farmers also with value chains. So in addition to providing the necessary inputs and the know-how, to also work with the private sector to link farmers into the value chains of companies that will then be able to export their products or sell it to the domestic market. That way you cover the entire value chain requirement. With regard to women, the participation of women in the labor force, that's been an identified constraint to growth because we only have about 34% female labor force participation. So there again, we looked at some interventions with regard to for the government to share the costs of maternity benefits of the private sector, and also to invest in facilities such as daycare, childcare sectors as well, so that will provide more flexibility for women to participate fully in the labor force, and also to continue to work on laws to provide more capability of flexible working hours and other factors that will make it easier for women to actively participate in the labor force. So those are some of the major interventions in that sector. And then of course, with regard to access to affordable finance, that has been a major constraint across the board for many industries and SMEs in particular. So the Enterprise Sri Lanka program that was started in last year's budget has been continued and expanded this year to build on some of the successes. So already about 60 billion rupees has been dispersed through the Enterprise Sri Lanka program to a number of SMEs, and that has been strengthened by adding a guarantee fund and other elements as well. And of course, we had a lot of emphasis on driving Sri Lanka's external inflows. So we supported sectors like tourism, exports, and FDI, because that is really the long-term requirement for the Sri Lankan economy. So a number of interventions to support those sectors as well. And of course, all of this was done within the fiscal consolidation program, so that we ensure that we have fiscal sustainability to enable our macro confidence for global markets. And so far, it has been successful. I think the sovereign bond was quite successfully launched. So I feel like this budget has managed to balance quite a few of those different objectives in a fair manner.